Hello, and you're very welcome to episode 85 of The Fifth Court, a podcast on legal affairs presented by myself, Peter Leonard, barrister and mediator.
And myself, Mark Tottenham, barrister and trust and estate practitioner.
Mark, good to see you as always. And you will recall that last week we had a cracking discussion with Martin Cooney, who's a solicitor from Byrne-Wallace, and he was kind of, talking about developers and obstacles in the way of development. And, we all have to buy into this and we have to look at it from both sides.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if we want the housing we need, we want the commercial property we need, the developers and landlords are a fact of life.
Yeah, I thought Martin was a very innovative thinker in relation to this. And no, it was good. I'd love to know who that developer was who wanted to just build a bridge across a river. And we'd love if we got a bit more information about that. But anyway, very public spirited. We'd all love to build a bridge, wouldn't we? Build a bridge.
With our name on it.
Okay, absolutely. Well, tonight we are returning to the law library, and we're returning with some style, it has to be said, Mark, because we're going to be joined by the legend that is Ercus Stewart, well-known senior counsel, and he's coming in to tell us about his very interesting legal career, and I think he's been a practicing barrister since 1970, Mark.
It is pretty extraordinary considering he still has...
I was in the world in 1970. Were you in the world in 1970?
I think I was born the year he was called to the bar.
Wow, there you go. So what a career of great longevity and lots of interesting twists and turns. We're looking forward to talking to him about that. But first, the three cases that you have identified from the Decisis website. Firstly, we're going to look at a case on the proceeds of crime and specifically whether disputed funds from alleged fraudulent transactions were actually the proceeds of crime. Did they come under that heading? I suppose that's the case. This is the case of the Criminal Assets Bureau versus Rootback Media AB, and it's the decision of Mr. Justice Donald Binchy in the Court of Appeal.
In the proceeds of crime legislation, there seems to be, it's a sort of two-step process. The CAB are able to bring proceedings in order to get something declared as proceeds of crime, and it gets frozen. And then after a certain number of years, there's an opportunity for the alleged criminal to say, to show that this was legitimately obtained. But after a certain number of years, the CAB can apply to get it confirmed as proceeds of crime, and then it gets transferred over to the state, to the Minister for Public Expenditure. And so that's what the application was in this case. And that order was granted by the High Court and affirmed on appeal by the Court of Appeal. And the respondent in the case was hoping to cross-examine the applicant in relation to certain matters. And what they said in the Court of Appeal was, you need to show grounds to cross-examine. You can't just cross-examine because you want to ask random questions. You need to show that there is an issue to cross-examine on. And so they refused the application to cross-examine and affirmed the order confirming the funds were the proceeds of crime. And it was $657,000 in this case.
Okay, wow. Okay, very interesting. Well, next to another very interesting case, and this concerns a job offer. I'm fascinated about this one, which was revoked after Garda vetting revealed that the individual in question had a number of convictions. His past caught up with them. Yeah. Was it a he or a she? Maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
The employer claimed that the job offer was conditional on the individual passing Garda vetting. So obviously he failed, he was out. This is the case of Lawless versus the Technological University of the Shannon Midlands, formerly Athlone Institute of Technology. And it's a decision from the Court of Appeal. I don't know who the judge is. Who is the judge?
Mr. Justice O'Moore.
O'Moore. Okay, very good.
So I'm sure a lot of people these days are familiar with the Garda vetting situation. If you want to work even with voluntary groups, you get Garda vetted. This was a job offer conditional on Garda vetting. Unfortunately, in this case, the proposed employee had previous convictions for handling stolen property and causing loss by deception. Obviously, the reason that the Garda vetting was sought was because he was going to work with young people, and so he maybe not unreasonably said, "I don't have any convictions that in any way suggest that I'm not appropriate to work with young people." But the employers said, "Well, that doesn't really matter. We applied for Garda vetting. You didn't tell us about these convictions, and now the guards have told us you have them." So they revoked the job offer, and he challenged that, and he lost.
Okay, and Mr. Justice O'Moore said, "No, tough. You had to
was
go for
affirmative
Garda
appeal.
vetting. Garda vetting came back with a big black mark against you.
Exactly. I think he probably should have disclosed the
There is an argument there.
stage.
There is a kind of civil liberties. If he's done his time, if his convictions were unrelated to
Well,
the fact that he was working with
We do
with
have the
children.
spent convictions legislation.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Yeah.
Well, come here.
Exactly.
Far be it from me to question a judge of the Court of Appeal, Mark. I'm going to stop now. Okay, finally to a European arrest warrant case, which concerned whether an individual should be returned to Croatia on war crimes charges. Croatia, wow. This concerned whether he would experience potential inhuman detention conditions. This is the Minister for Justice against Rakanovic, and it's a decision in the High Court of Ms. Justice Melanie Greeley.
Yeah, so exactly. This is a war crimes alleged offence dating back to the time of the Balkan Wars.
1990s, I presume, is it?
Yeah. The European arrest warrant was challenged on a number of different grounds, but the respondents succeeded on the basis that it seems that in Croatian jails there is very restricted space, and in fact the suggestion was that in some cases there's less than 3 square meters per prisoner in certain cells, and these are cells that have a number of people in them. Now, I think, unless I've got this right, the table we're sitting at is probably 2 square meters. So we're talking an extremely restricted space for people to live in. And what they said was that there seemed to have been international supervision of Croatian jails, and this is an issue that has been raised internationally. And so what the judge said was that it was open to the Croatian authorities to rebut or to satisfy the court that they were not in human conditions, and they failed to do it. So once the question had been raised, the court simply said, well, we can't extradite somebody to a country where they're going to have such limited space available in the prison.
Okay, so prison conditions were not acceptable. That's what the court found. Exactly. But isn't it fascinating that, those Balkan Wars, and when Croatia was involved, it was kind of the early 90s, I think. Yeah. I mean, and all these years later, war crimes alleged against somebody who's settled in Ireland.
There's no statute of limitation on war crimes.
No, definitely not.
Good reason.
Just really interesting. It's a case I must take a look at. Okay, back shortly with Senior Counsel Ercus Stewart.
Silence in the Fifth Court.
Okay, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the studio a man who I can say is a legend of the Law Library, Senior Counsel Ercus Stewart. Ercus, thanks for coming in. And you are the first guest we have had on the Fifth Court who had to come in and park his bicycle. Did you get your bicycle sorted?
Everything in order.
Yes, good. And where did you cycle from?
Four Courts.
The Four Courts, okay. And then you're cycling home, which is out in County Wicklow somewhere, isn't it?
It's out in the mountains, yeah.
Out in the mountains. Only by bike? The only way to travel?
For the last 20, 30 years, only by bike, yeah.
Okay.
Hail, rain and snow.
Yeah, no, well, that I know.
Except last week, a dog ran in front of me, which wasn't great.
No, but you survived that.
Yeah. So did the dog.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good news. Okay, let's go back to the start, Ercus. You've had a long life in the Law Library, but will we go back even before that? Connell, our producer here, got very excited when you were coming in, when Closh the Wirra was mentioned. Os Gaeilge, I didn't know you were a Gaeilgeoir. Yeah. So you were educated Os Gaeilge, is that true?
Sa bhunscoil agus sa manscoil, Closh the Wirra in Blaclia.
So
Hendeag Bleanown.
So go back to those days for me.
So obviously in Closh the Wirra, everything was through Irish, including Latin, French, through Irish trigonometry, algebra, everything. And it was difficult when I left because a lot of technical terms, and it was of no benefit to me at the bar, no benefit to me really in life, but I'm glad I did it. I think everybody should have the second language.
Absolutely.
And it was in Parnell Square then?
Parnell.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's technically the first language, isn't it? And I mean, we should know it, and I should know it better than I do, and I don't, shamefully. But that's the way. So look, you left Closh the Wirra, and you obviously went to university or something like that. Tell us about that.
In fact, I think only maybe 2 from my class went to university. It was it wasn't the usual school for law students. So I started UCD 1966 and King's Inns finished 1970, called to the bar 1970.
Okay, so you've been a barrister since 1970. Wow, okay. Go back to UCD in 1966. You would have been there because we know you were a radical politician amongst everything else, Ercus. You would have been there for the gentle revolution, would you?
I was there in 68. In fact, I only changed really as regards how I regarded life in 68. I spent every summer abroad working. I had to earn my fees. So I spent 2 years in London, 2 summers, then 68, 69, 70 in the United States on a J1 visa. And that's really when I developed and changed, came back. Yes, and I then was interested in all of that, yeah.
Storming the barricades? I
didn't storm the barricades, no, but I was at that stage quite not radical, but hopefully progressive.
And what was UCD like in those days in Earlsford Terrace?
I think I'd say it was probably the best years of my life. I enjoyed it immensely. Enjoyed my pals, and I didn't realise it. I actually liked my lecturers and professors. I didn't realise it then. But looking back, I have fond memories of them. I think they were interested and interesting.
Yes, okay, very good. And who would be contemporaries of yours in UCD in those days that are currently in the bar or were in the bar?
Well, in those days, for example, people who lectured us would have John Blaney, Rory O'Hanlon, they came in to lecture us.
And they went up to be judges afterwards, yes.
Yeah, usually at 9 a.m. before court or 4:30 after court. Barrister still in the library, Jack Fitzgerald, Angus Bullockon, Owen Murnan has left. So I think most of them have left.
Okay, very good.
Or unfortunately, maybe some are deceased.
And it was always going to be the bar, Ercus, was it? Always the bar? You didn't want to be a solicitor, get a handy job?
I never thought of becoming a solicitor, and I don't know why I decided I would like to become a barrister, but I know I was asked in school at around age 15, and it was either a priest or the bar, or a barrister, I said, and I remember being laughed at not only by the class, but by the teacher. That might have made me want to proceed.
Gave you a little bit of determination.
Yeah.
Okay, so you came into the bar. Who did you devil with?
Deviled with Harry Hill.
Oh, who was a former master, wasn't he?
No, he became master of the High Court. Master of the High Court, yeah.
Yeah, subsequently. Okay, and what was that like?
Well, he was a very fine, modest, polite, very generous man. Devils before me were Peter Sutherland, Michael Moriarty. Devils after me were Paul Gilligan, Brian McGovern. I think nearly all of his devils became judges, bar me. They all wondered why, but that was my choice. And I ended up taking silk with Michael Moriarty in 82, Barry White, Nicholas Kearns, and who the heck was Kevin O'Higgins.
Wow,
and all of those 4 became judges, high and on beyond that. Again, each one of them, when they became judges, said, "When are you joining us?" And I never did.
You'd missed the action of court too much, Ercus, I think. Okay, and so like 1970 you came in, and then within 12 years you were senior counsel. But it was a much smaller shop in those days, wasn't it? I mean, there wasn't that many of you, really.
I'd say there were max 200, of which there were only 10 or less women. So it was a very different bar.
And just, you know, we had the pleasure of interviewing Kevin O'Higgins, who is a very well-known solicitor, and we talked about his family and the tradition in law. I mean, you didn't have that.
No, I did have an uncle who was a solicitor.
Oh, well, that wasn't too bad.
An uncle who was a circuit judge.
Actually, you were very well connected, so.
Yeah, but I've absolutely, and I genuinely mean it, absolutely no benefit. My mother wants me to use a double-barrel name so that her brother's name would be the reason I would be briefed. I didn't go for the double barrel because I just didn't like the idea. My uncle, the solicitor, promised me numerous times he'd brief me and never did until I was well established, and I got a district court civil process out of him. The fee was 3 guineas, which I never received, and that was the only brief I ever got from him. My uncle, the judge, whom I loved dearly and a very fine man, I appeared before him, I think 3 times, because he ended up twice sitting in Dublin. And I once had to go to Carlow on a case, and he was there. I was never successful before him because he told me, I have to bend over backwards when you're before me. Now, I've no problem with that. He was an absolute gentleman, and I loved him dearly, but never won before.
What was his name?
Sean Fawcett.
Okay.
And my mother was Sheila Fawcett.
Willie Fawcett.
Willie Fawcett, who died 2 years ago.
Yeah, the late Willie Fawcett, wonderful man.
Great character.
And his sister Alice in Cork, who I worked with. Yeah, fabulous. Oh, yeah, okay.
But Willie is a sad loss.
Yes, absolutely. So he'd be a first cousin of yours then, was he?
First cousin.
Wow, okay, I didn't know that.
And a great pal.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, we're very sorry to hear of his passing. Okay, in terms of the law library, you were a bit of a Edmund Hillary or a Neil Armstrong. You went where kind of people hadn't gone before, employment law. Okay, it's obviously an area that a lot of us work in and generate an income out of these days. But you were kind of a pioneer in that area. There wasn't anybody else doing it, was there?
It was a pure accident, and it wasn't my decision. And people say I specialised in employment law. In fact, employment law specialised in me by accident. So when in my very early years of the bar, there was an opportunity to give lectures once a week to a trade union. And there were about 6 applicants, one of which was a professor of labour law. And I applied. But because I was a practicing barrister, I got the gig. And for 1 year, I gave 1-hour lectures every Wednesday morning from 9 until 10, and hopefully then get to the 4 courts. They ran it again Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and I did it 8:30 till 10. And I learned as much from having to learn the subject to teach as the questions I was asked that I had to answer, and at least give some sort of a respectable answer. From there, I was asked to give more and more lectures. That was 1972. We joined the EEC, European Economic Community, in 73. The law started to develop. We got the new legislation. Because I was now interested and had to lecture on the topic, every single bill, every act when passed, I read absolutely through and through. I wrote articles on them, gave lectures on them. And of course, every solicitor in Ireland would, if they had a problem, they might come to me as their first port of call.
You were the go-to guy.
I was for a long time.
And there was a lot of legislation coming in then, of course, the Unfair Dismissals Act, 1977, I think, wasn't it?
Michael
O'Leary.
Yeah.
Michael O'Leary, who was then Minister for Labour in the coalition government of the mid-70s. Okay, so you started developing employment law. And what was there beforehand then? Was it just old-fashioned contract law, or what was it?
It was called master and servant law, and that's what it was. They were masters and they were servants. And there was basically no rights. Any case you would run, it would be in the district court because it would be their basic notice entitlement. That was it. But all of these tribunals then, there was a redundancy appeals tribunal. I did a case in 1971, believe it or not, in that old tribunal, a constructive dismissal case for a worker, a novel type of case, but we won. And from then on, when the Employment Appeals Tribunal was established, it became, I suppose, a speciality of solicitors to brief me there.
And that was under the 1977 Act, was it?
Under the 77 Act. And then, of course, we had the Employment Equality Act. That was a huge change. But I would say one of the most fundamental changes in Irish law in my time was the Unfair Dismissals Act and the Employment Equality Act. Changed totally people's rights, workers' rights.
And the other practitioner in employment law at that time was Roddy Horan, isn't that right?
He was my devil.
He was your devil. So the two of you were kind of the main men in this area, weren't you?
Well, he came to the bar probably, he was my second devil. He came to the bar probably I took my first devil, Miriam Malone, after about 5 or 6 years practicing. She became president of the district court. She was an excellent barrister. Then Roddy Horan, I had Barry Hickson, Inge Klisman. My last devil was Greta Walsh before I took Silk.
Okay.
I should tell you a story about her later. A good story.
Okay, absolutely. Please do. But yeah, I am curious about the employment law because it is such a huge area of law now. I mean, if you go to any of the corporate firms, they'll have a floor of solicitors who are dealing with kind of employment matters and partners.
There was no such
galore,
thing.
all of this, and I mean, it's all to do with, obviously they're signing contracts and doing all that sort of stuff. But I mean, a lot of it is to do with litigation that happens now, obviously in the WRC has replaced the Employment Appeals Tribunal, but in the High Court, there's loads of employment action. So you were there at the start of this?
Yeah, at the very start, yes, yeah.
Okay, all right, okay.
And I probably ran the first injunctions and then ended up defending them as well. And many, many test cases.
And one of the other cases that you were involved in was the famous legal aid case.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. We previously had John McMenamin in here, and he talked about that and his involvement. And Frank Clark, all the greats, Ercus. You were all in the room together.
How that started, I finished my exams in 1970 in summer I got the plane immediately to the United States, J1 visa. So I didn't take the call to the bar in July. I was due to take it in November 1970, and I came back from the States not intending to practice. I had been involved in UCD from about 67, 68 with a group called the Dublin Tutorial Programme. And we used to teach children the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic, down in Sheriff Street, Mayor Street, where the IFSC now is. But it was then an absolutely terrible conditions, slum, but the children were magnificent. And we taught them on maybe 2 or 3 weeknights, a number of us students. There was 1 or 2 law students. When I came back from the States, I got a telephone call saying 5 of these children are up in the Children's Court for arson. Now, I'd never heard of the Children's Court. I knew nothing about juvenile delinquency, despite the fact that I was working in inner city Dublin. Just never came across it. No, none of the parents ever mentioned it. So I couldn't defend them because I wasn't yet called to the bar. I got the case adjourned. Then I organised a solicitor to formally instruct me, defended the 3 children for arson, and the case was dismissed. They would have been, I think, convicted if they hadn't been represented. From that, many, many parents started asking our little group, could they get this guy to defend their children? And I almost, my whole deviling year, unfortunately for Harry Hill, I was spending in the Children's Court. It's the only time in my career I had nightmares because I was frightened of the whole system. But I continued. And I then noticed things like loitering with intent, not only adults, but children being charged with loitering with intent, contrary to the Vagrancy Act of 1824. And this was where a guard would see a young fella in the streets of Dublin, and because he knew that young fella had previous convictions, he contended he was loitering with the intention of committing a crime. So I saw this isn't right. So the same boys that we did the free legal aid case, we challenged the convictions under the Vagrancy Act and succeeded. The constitutional point I wanted to raise wasn't dealt with because there was no need. There was a defect in the prosecution and conviction.
So how did that come up then?
Well, obviously I could see in the Children's Court, and then I was getting work in the District Court, I could see people were not getting legal aid. They were having to defend themselves, or if they had money, they had lawyers. So I just said, this isn't right. So the next case of a person who was convicted without legal aid, I said, we have to challenge that. And when that case came up, instead of going through an appeal in the Circuit Court, I launched a case, judicial review or stateside case for certiorari against the District Justice. And
what case was this?
Healy and Foran against District Justice. It was, I think, Donoghue, and there was another against District Judge Riley. And that then, I started that by an ex parte application in the High Court. I then, after I had done that paperwork and the original application, I asked a very good senior, whom I got on well with, Rory O'Hanlon, SC, to lead me. He was excellent, and we ran that case and we succeeded. We later ran a case on the Vagrancy Act, and we had that declared unconstitutional about a year or two later.
And can I just ask you, in relation to all of these prosecutions for loitering and in the Children's Court, I mean, were you effectively acting pro bono in most of these cases? I mean,
well, not really effectively. I was pro bono. There was the only fee I ever received was from one parent. I got an apple when I walked past her stall. She was a street trader. And I do recall family law. I defended a 70-year-old woman against her very wealthy husband. She gave me a tea cozy for my representative here in the District Court.
So there was no legal aid either in criminal District Court proceedings or in family law at that stage?
Well, absolutely none in family. And in legal aid, there was no obligation to inform. So most people didn't know they had the right to it. It came in theoretically in 72, but it didn't really exist in practice for many years. It's probably now maybe used far too much. Maybe people are getting legal aid they're not entitled to.
What do you mean by that they're not entitled to?
Well, I would, when I look at cases, I can't obviously mention any case, but if I look at cases in the paper,
curious.
and I see that somebody who clearly has money and clearly has assets, and yet he or she is granted free legal aid, and I just think it's different to what I was...
We had Luigi Ray in here at one stage, and he talked about the fact that because of the potential clients you have and all of that sort of stuff, that it's probably better just to keep everybody on the one system. I think that was so maybe that's kind of what you're talking about there.
I go with that, and obviously many hundreds of years ago, people still, despite not being able to afford it, they seem to have been able to. If you look at very, very old cases, they seem to, in many cases, have legal representation. Now that was probably pro bono as well. I don't know.
Okay. All right, let's go back to your experience within the bar. I mean, have you enjoyed it over the years, Ercus?
I have enjoyed it. It's a changed place. It's changed the profession. I think it was far more enjoyable in my early days. It's much more now dog eat dog, a lot more technical, as against we had good fun. Even though doing a proper job, it was enjoyable.
What is lost? Is it partly just that it's a much bigger profession? I mean, you were saying there's only 200 back then, and presumably a lot of those were on circuit, so it's a very small Dublin bar.
A very small Dublin bar. So the law library wouldn't really open until very late in the morning. If you were in there at 9:30, you were very, very early. I recall years later, to get a parking spot outside, you'd have to be there at 7 a.m., but that was not like it when I started. The bar changed. The whole legal profession, I think, has changed. And then COVID, I think, has affected barristers in our practice. I do regret for the younger barristers, those during COVID who got no court experience.
Sure. But was there any noticeable sudden change over those years? I mean, for example, I imagine, the days before mobile phones would have been a very different time to now when you see everybody kind of taking calls.
Yeah, well, the mobile phone is obviously a huge interference with our lives, yet I couldn't survive now without it.
Sure.
But look, let's go back to the photocopier. I mean, people used to have to handwrite out copies. Then we had the dictating machine, so all that.
And when you were drafting your pleadings in the early 70s, I mean, were you handwriting? Were you dictating them to a secretary?
In the early days, handwriting and giving them to the solicitors handwritten. Solicitors like to see a nice presentation.
Sure.
Yet I know very, very eminent senior counsel back in those days who would write out in very, very fine handwriting, much better than my handwriting, their opinions. And those handwritten opinions were worth their weight in gold. And I can still remember some of them, the signatures on them. I don't have them, but I remember them.
I think I've once in my practice saw a handwritten opinion by I better not name, but somebody who later became a judge. But it was lovely old italic handwriting.
You probably can't name him. He probably was proud of it.
Yeah, well, T.C. Smith, who I think is deceased.
Yeah.
So Ercus, you developed a practice, and you practiced in all of the courts. Did you? District, circuit, high, Supreme Court.
I practiced in every court. I did them in Irish and English. Very, very few in Irish, but in all courts and tribunals. But starting at the bar, and like most of my colleagues, I did every type of work. I mean, everything. In every court, in every part of Ireland. I've been to every district court around the country. One example would have been I went as far as Malin. The fee was 7 guineas. My bus and my bed and breakfast was £12. But that was to continue to get some work. I was asked to act for street traders in Mullingar District Court, one street trader. Arising out of that, I defended street traders all over Ireland, and I won all of them, all of about 40 towns where they were trying to abolish street trading, and I lost 3. And instead of going to the Circuit Court where I believed I would lose, I took a case stated to the High Court and won one of them, I think it was Navan, and lost Carlow and Dungarvan. So I took silk on the 5th of March 1982, a Friday, and on Monday, the following Monday, the 8th March, the Supreme Court was due to hear my appeals in the Carlow and Dungarvan street trading cases. I went into the court fully assembled my papers, and within a matter of seconds, Tommy Connolly SC, who appeared with John Cook SC and Susan Denham BL, raised an objection, a technical point that I had no appeal, no right to be there. And on my first day as a senior, my life was destroyed because the court agreed with him. And I took all my papers to hobble out of the court. And I just said, just at one point. And the presiding judge, Judge Henchy, asked, yeah. So I made a point. He said, continue on. I made another point. That went on for about a day. So they heard my appeal. And about 3 months later, at the end of July, we won the 2 appeals. My devil, whom I mentioned earlier, was Greta Walsh. She was my last devil. So she was without a master. I said, would you like to be my junior in this case? You might get into the law reports. That was my only suggestion. She was delighted. She'd be in the Supreme Court in her first year at the bar. When we won, she says to me, Ercus, do you mind giving me a loan? We've got our cost in those 2 appeals, and I'll obviously get a fee now. Would you mind giving me a loan for my summer holidays? And she asked for about £500 or £1,000, gave it to her, and she duly paid it back. Probably 10 years later, when we finally got our our cost tax.
So it took...
But that just shows you how my career was about to go down in flames. And Tommy Connolly was one of the best constitution lawyers. I had great respect for him, but I don't know why he pulled that stunt.
So the moral of the story is what? Persistence. When they tell you to leave, and when you pack up all your belongings, you're about to leave the court, have another go. Is that what you're saying?
I was very young senior. The 3 judges were obviously, double or triple my age. Tommy Connolly was about 5 times my age. Well, not 5 times. I felt, I'd made a complete fool of myself within a matter of seconds. Yes, something came to mind. I mentioned something. The judges took an interest. I mentioned it, proceeded. The judges took a further interest. And the case went on. I think it went on for the whole day. Maybe went into a second day. But anyway, we won that. Yes, persistence in that case. But it was a hell of a lesson.
You couldn't do that now. I mean, is there room for somebody to do that now?
There's not the same room. No. There's not the same.
It's all a bit too serious now, isn't it?
It is. And
you'd have these wonderful legal submissions that go on for pages and pages and pages.
Yes.
So it's all done ahead of you saying boo these days,
Yes, the advocacy on your feet and the arguments on your feet is not as it was. But those street trading cases are very interesting because I'd never ever planned to do a street trading case. I just happened to take one in Mullingar District Court. Arising out of that, I did others, and I enjoy them.
And Ercus, you listed off all your classmates and your contemporaries and, the people that kind of peopled the law library in the 70s, etc. And they all went onto the bench and they all got the big wig and sat up on the bench and became judges. Why did that route never appeal to you?
I actually don't mind, and I do like judging as an arbitrator. I like to mediate as a mediator. I often thought of it, but I never applied for it, never sought it. And I'm glad I didn't, because I would now be retired compulsorily, like all of my contemporaries. And I would prefer to have the freedom to practice as long as I want. I don't have to, but I will continue as long as I get some satisfaction out of it.
And do you still get the same old buzz out of representing people? I mean, it's a long time ago since you were acting for those children in the North Inner City. I mean, is it different now? I mean, obviously you'd have very high profile clients. You'd have, the fees would be slightly different, one would imagine.
Yeah, I don't get
the same buzz?
No, it's not the same buzz. No. Occasionally, if you do achieve a good result, and not usually for a big client, it's usually for one of the smaller clients. If you do achieve it against the odds, there's a buzz. But there's not nearly as much as there would have been in the old days, no.
And the desire then to keep going, what's that?
Well, I would probably annoy everybody if I just retired and got in their hair. It's this. I'm free to stop tomorrow morning. I could just literally hang up my wig, which I don't wear, but hang up my boots and just stop. But I don't have to, so I'll continue while I'm healthy. And it keeps me active.
Oh, great. Okay, well, long may it continue, Ercus. Ercus, we have a question, and I did notify you before this.
Oh, I hope it's not the question.
Yes, it is the question. So you have to tell me about a book or a movie, and hopefully in your case you'll tell us about both. So can you recommend a book to start with to our listeners?
Not really. You did ask me, and I just was thinking about it outside. When I did that legal aid case, I recall a journalist giving me a book called Gideon's Trumpet.
Oh, yes.
Which was about
America, yeah.
The United States Gideon v. Wainwright, which I had relied upon in the court application. Oddly, last week, and before you rang me, I had picked off a shelf at home a book about Victor Bewley by, I think, Fiona Murdoch. Now, I had looked at it before and read through it, and for some reason I started reading it again, and I found that enjoyable.
And why Victor Bewley? Very obviously the well-known family, famous Quaker, famous travellers' rights activist, wasn't he?
He was. He was actually very involved. But if there was no reason, I just happened to be looking for something on a bookshelf at home, and this was there. And I just, on a Saturday, started to read it and enjoyed it. Books that I enjoy would be more things like Flann O'Brien, The Third Policeman on Bail Booked, or The Poor Mouth, something frivolous like that. And I've had clients like Flann O'Brien in my day. Sometimes you would say they were absolute nutcases working in the civil service, causing havoc, but they were of the same mentality as him. And he is a funny author.
Okay. And what about a movie? Do you ever get a chance to watch the small screen or the large screen? The silver screen?
I have. I think the films I would enjoy would be funny films, something that would take my mind off the world. None come to mind right now. I should have done my homework.
That's okay. That's okay. Ercus, okay, I think we're at it. Conall has given me the nod. He's given me the nod. Ercus Stewart, Senior Counsel, extraordinary man of the Law Library. Thank you for coming in and being a guest on the Fifth Court.
The Fifth Court will adjourn until next week.
So that's all from this edition of the Fifth Court. We hope you have enjoyed it. Can I say a huge thank you to Senior Counsel Ercus Stewart for coming in and talking to us. Mark, I wish I devilled with him. I could have borrowed a few bob to go on holidays as well.
Yes, but he took silk in 1982, which I think might be before you were in a position to devil.
I'd love someone to lend me a few bob to go on holidays. But anyway, there you go. Great interview, wasn't it?
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. It was really good. He was very good for coming in, and I really enjoyed that. I'd like to say a big thank you to our producer, Conall O'Moran, and to Lee Brennan of the Dublin South Podcast Studio for his wonderful work in recording this show. So for me, Peter Leonard,
myself, Mark Tottenham,
thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon in the Fifth Court.